we're creating this wave-like effect, waterfall waves, that we positioned a SOP over and made that auto-reactive. So this is going to be part 1 of probably a 3-part series, where we dive into some different aspects to make these a little bit shorter. So this is what we're looking at, and this is what we're going to recreate. So let's start. I'm going to zoom out of here. I'm going to X this thing out. I'm going to create a new base container, and we're going to recreate everything. So as we go inside here, the first thing we're going to do is add a grid in our SOPs. We are on the end of this. We are going to add a transform. We are then going to add a fractal, and this is what we talked about in class, a little bit of giving some edginess to our things. After the fractal, we are going to add a noise. And at the end of this, like always, we are going to add a null. So these are our 5 operators right now, and within SOPLAN. And if we right click on this outlet, we are going to take this into a geometry. And anytime we add a geometry, we are going to add a camera, so we can take this from 3D space into the 2D plane. So we're going to add a camera. And we are going to also add a render. So the render is going to render this out. And at the end of this chain, we're going to add a null, put it way back out here. So we're going to add some other things later. Call this BG for background. And one of the things I always like to do in these is go zoom out of this, go into my base, take my base, switch the output to BG so that I can see what's inside there. And I'm going to just name this water waves, opposite of the name above. So we have the water waves, and we're going to go back inside here and start adjusting it. As you notice, I haven't added a light yet. So instead of adding a light, what I'm going to use is add a material. And in this material, I'm going to add a line. So something new here that we really haven't talked about yet, but we are talking about now. I'm going to drag this line onto my geo. I'm going to farm the material. And I'm going to turn on this background so we can kind of see like what's going on here. And this is a pretty cool effect as it is, but it's not what the example was looking for. So we're just going to keep altering this a bit. And I am going to take this grid and I'm going to switch it into the XZ plane. So here we have something that is going on here. And we're going to take the amplitude of this and take it down to 0.1 so it's not as crazy. And we want to get some like depth of field to this. So we're going to go into our grid and we're going to change the size of it. So I'm going to go to like 5 and let's say 20. And so right now we're looking obviously straight at it. So we're going to take our camera and instead of positioning a new null, like we kind of do our camera position nulls, we're just going to adjust it in here this time. So I'm going to go to 2 and now you can see it's sitting in the space. And, but we're not seeing all of it because our camera is sitting above it and this is like pushing to a certain way. So if we go into our grid, and we kind of start to position this a little bit out, let's say -10. So we're pushing it down in the Z space. Let's say -20. -20 would be okay. And then we'll just increase this to, let's say 40. So we're giving it some more length. Right? So we have that. And so we kind of have like our little floating water on here. And we're going to take, what we're going to do here is we're going to take all this section right here. There's always different ways to do this, but I'm just going to do it the quick and dirty way of just copying and pasting. And this isn't the most efficient way, but this is a way just as an example of how we're going to like position the grid, right? Because I want to make, like in the example, this water that's coming down from the ceiling. So I'm going to go into here and I'm going to switch this to the XY plane. So now it's sitting in front of it, but we have to like adjust it back in the Z axis, right? And if you do my little fancy dancy trick here of aiming at a camera and seeing like where things are positioned in space, you can see like, again, how things are and how they're lining up. So it's the biggest thing is this is pretty big, so we're going to adjust some of that in the size, but we still need to kind of like push it back, right? And how things are positioning and how they're pushing back. So we're going to go into this section right here, this grid that we have, and we are going to push this back to, let's say, -40. And so it's still sitting there, but it kind of just looks a little strange of like how things are lining up. So we're going to change the length of it. And we're also going to take this from not so many columns or so many rows and columns. We're going to kind of thin it out a little bit. So let's say 10. Or actually, maybe we'll do 2 rows. We're going to change this to like 10 columns so it has the lines. And then we're going to kind of like position this again in space and like where it's sitting in the axis. So I'm trying to line this up to like the edge of it. And you can see in my camera over here, it's kind of like showing that example. Is it perfect? Probably not, but it's pretty close. So I'd say that's close enough. And it's also in the distance. So that's not really something I'm overly concerned about lining these up exactly. But they are pretty close for this. Okay. So we kind of have this effect and we have these things going on. And what we're going to do now is just kind of adjust some of this. And how do we want to make this look, right? So in our amplitude for, let's say, our waves out here in this plane, we can just like bump this up a little bit. And this is something, again, where you're going to kind of play with this. Oops, I'm in the wrong one. So I would go to this one. And I'm just going to give it some depth, right? And the other thing, too, is like in this fractal, we can say, as we kind of give this, again, some depth is like, you know, or how many lines and how many fractals it is doing to this. I'm just looking for a little bit of a waveform kind of scenario with some grids. And I can scale this and switch like how many I want in there. So it's, again, it's just all based on what you're kind of looking for. And like what the aesthetic is that you're adjusting with this. So again, that kind of seems okay to me. And I think that in this back plane, and the same as the example, what I'm going to do is kind of thin this out a little bit again. And I'm going to change the columns, let's say, to 5. Oops. Got to make sure that I'm in the right one again. So I'm going to change this to 5. I don't like that. So I'm going to do 8. So this is kind of like what I'm looking for here. But I don't necessarily want this to be uneven. So I can just turn this fractal off. And when I do that, it's obviously not switching that up as much. So this is where I would go back into this grid and then, again, play with the numbers and say, let's say 12. So I want it like maybe a couple more lines, or maybe I'm looking for something like this that it's kind of like streamlined. It's kind of matching this, but not actually. It is 20 and 20, so that's kind of good. So it's kind of lining up with what I'm looking at. It has some depth of field. I can see now the edge, a little bit of how this is positioning, and I saw like an uneven point when this like little noise in the back was there. So I'm just gonna go back again to this line, and I'm just going to position this down in this space, let's say 9. and it's going to kind of just like hang it down a little bit. But because you really can't see that in the depth of field, it's just perspective, or now I can see it a little bit in the bottom. So again, this is things where you're kind of just adjusting numbers and like what kind of evens it out or what doesn't even out. And I think that looks good for right now. And we're going to do some other things onto it that's going to kind of like transform this anyways. So I'm just looking and just seeing like what's working. So this is all great and everything that we have this line and it's all white, but I showed you some color in there. So we are going to add a ramp, and we are going to add some colors into this ramp. And I'm going to take this first black and I'm going to switch this to blue. And let's say I'm going to make this even on both sides. So let's say 240. I'm going to go over here and do the same thing. So 240, I want it blue. And then I'm going to add something in the middle. So this is, you can have multiple colors and multiple different things, but right in the middle, I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So I have like a little bit, I'm trying to think of like water and color. So I'm adjusting my saturation, what my levels are. And I have like this little thing going right here, right? We talked about some expressions in class, so and some little Python. So I'm going to do abs time dot seconds, and I'm going to divide this by 5, so it's moving slow, not too fast. I'm going to switch my extend left to mirror. So it's going to just be how these things are kind of pushing out and how it's giving you some form again in the ramp. One thing too I'm going to do, and what I add in a lot of things before I forget, is I'm going to add a resolution constant. So I'm going to do res x, res y. I'm going to change this to 1920 by 1080. And I'm going to rename this resolution. And you would think that I would have one of these that I can just like bring in at all times, but for some reason I just recreate them every time. I don't know why. Probably because I add some other elements in here. But we're going to do this, and I'm going to basically take these values into our comment here, change the resolution of the screen. So I have a good starting point. I'm also going to change this ramp resolution, just so I know that it is something in case I change in the future that's also going to kind of like mesh with everything that I got going on, right? So now we need these values to go into this line. And this line that's referencing this geo, and maybe this is a good time also to, like, as you saw, I kept clicking around in the different things, is let's say these are the waves. So we're doing some renaming slightly here. And I'm going to say this is the waterfall. And I'm going to take this and I want to parse this data out, right? So I want to basically, I'm going to click on here, right click. I'm going to go to chop and top 2. So I'm taking some of these values from this ramp and I'm switching them into a channel operator. And for this, I don't want the alpha, so I'm going to delete that. And so I'm just looking for the RGB. And there's going to be more because we're going to be doing stuff in part 2 and how we're going to take some audio and push this stuff around, right? So we're going to go into this line, and in the line you can see there is the line near color and the line far color. And so this is kind of cool, is you can do different types of things, right? So I could take these values, and as I push these, I'm just going to drag and do some chop references here. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to take these values of the top 2 into the line, And then this is where I kind of would adjust in my align near alpha. And as I bring this alpha down, or my line far alpha, and you can see how it's going to adjust within this space, right? And specify for line color, specify for line near alpha. So this is where you can kind of like position like two different tops if you wanted to. Like you could have one down here that's going to be something else, line far alpha, line near alpha. And let's just do this. So let's take this and copy this as an example. Do the same type of thing. Go into the top 2. Take away my alpha here. And I'm going to change this color in my ramp to, let's say something slightly different. Let's bring in maybe some green. I'm going to change this 240 to, yeah, let's say 170. Oops. Change this one to 170. I'm going to change this back to like a bluish, right? So we have two different kinds of colors going on here. And in this same thing, I'm going to take my near to far color thing, and I'm going to go into my line far color and change this. So we have like two different little tops going on here. And then you can just do some like blending between the two of them and saying like, okay, where am I going to position these? And, you know, it's just, again, giving you some types of options. As you can see, this has a yellow flag on it, right? So how do we fix that? And it's the one thing that's in here that's going to, we have to, let's see, we got to find it. And it's in common blending transparency. So we're going to turn that on. And these are some different settings, again, that you can switch and play with, and what is going to look like, and how you adjust these things. But I'm just going to put that there. And it's going to get rid of our little yellow flag for this. Okay, so we have this section right here. And again, this is just playing again with different types of things in here. Like, what do I want to do with the fractal? Do I want to scale this a little bit? You know, do I want these to be a little bit more choppy waves, or not as many? You know, so do I want to change the divisions on this? So it's a little bit more, and it's switching this up. So this is like a stronger wave, right? So again, it's all based on what you're looking for, what aesthetic you're looking for. And you just kind of go from there, and that's the fun of it, right? So we're going to take this, we're going to move this way, turn pause on that, or turn this off so we don't need to use those resources. And one of the things that I talked about in class is using some of these image filters, right? And what we can do with this. So I'm going to bring this radio blur in here, and I'm going to take this node, put it into the radio blur, and you can see, you're like, what on earth is going on there, right? So I'm going to take down my dry wet a little bit, but I'm trying to create, like, as I did in the example of, like, if you think about like water and what's going on in water, and you know, how it kind of looks, and I'm just putting like a little bit of a haze on it. And the biggest thing is, obviously, it's pushing off that way. So I know that if I press 0.5 here, it's going to kind of shoot it up. And this is the effect that I was trying to achieve. And this is kind of like a good position to start in here of our part 1. And we'll finish off with that. And utilize this as we add some more things into it, right? So as I close this out, I'm going to do one thing here. I'm going to select everything. Or actually, I already built this in a base. So now I have this base out here. And let's see, how close did I make it to this other one that I made? Somewhat similar, some different colors. So you could go into here too, and you could say, I know for this radio blur, I could increase this to give it a little bit more depth. I could also go back into my fractal and switch like how much I'm giving it, right? And I did do some different colors, but it's just things again that you kind of switch with and adjust it to your liking. The one other thing that we can do in just of all uniformity right here is we're just going to add an out to this little base container, and that way we can as we go out, we can now have an out that we can add some other things into it, right? And that is going to conclude part 1.